am a lawyer, but I am not necessarily your lawyer. The materials discussed in this podcast are for informational purposes only and should not be deemed legal advice. If you have a specific legal question according to your circumstances, then I encourage you to speak with an attorney licensed in your jurisdiction. Welcome back to another edition of Ag Law Today. We've got a very special guest in the house, Julie Fershtman, all the way from Michigan. How are you, Julie?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
So Julie is a well-known equine attorney and author there's at least 2 horse sense books, right, Julie?
We're now on number 3.
Wow, that's exciting. So tell our listeners a little bit more about your horse sense book series.
Well, the newest book was published by the American Bar Association late October of last year. It is a very comprehensive book covering a whole bunch of different issues involving horses. This is the cover. I'm kind of hiding it from you guys. But when I say it's a pretty comprehensive book, I mean that it is 367 pages, covering a whole variety of things, and I'm proud of it. It includes the content from my earlier books published many years ago, and a lot of new content. So yeah, excited about it.
That's fantastic. And I think what I love about you, Julie, and your work and in your books is they're very practical and they give the readers, good substantive information. And I'm curious, just author to author, how was the drafting process for you?
As any author will tell you, and you would understand, it's tedious. Because I think writing a book, especially something of this type that involves the law, a book that isn't necessarily intended for a lawyer audience, means that you've got to simplify the topics. And as a lawyer, I find that to simplify a topic means that you really have to break it down. And it helps me as a lawyer do that. So that's probably the hardest part, thinking through and making sure it's understandable. And it's a win-win, though, for everybody. Even the lawyers have found the book useful. Happy to say the book has won 3 national awards already. Pretty cool.
Yes, I saw that. That's amazing. That's quite an accomplishment. And Julie, we're talking now in the middle of, COVID. I see that you're in the office. I'm in the office. How has COVID been for you as an attorney?
Well, my practice hasn't slowed down. In fact, in 34 years as a lawyer, this year, 2020, has been my busiest, which is very interesting. But unfortunately, I can't say that the majority of my practice has been related to livestock and agricultural issues, a pretty substantial part. The fact of the matter is, legal issues continue, litigation continues, things slow down, but the work is still there. What about you?
Well, I do both agriculture law and family law, and I've realized that family law is pandemic proof. So people fight, during quarantine and during COVID and things. But even my agriculture side of my practice has certainly been busy as well. So my staff and myself have been happy. I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that the court does not shut down again, because that was very difficult. Navigating that for about 2.5 months in the spring. So Julie, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about you, the firm that you're at, your practice specifically?
Well, I'm sure the listeners would rather get right to the meat of the presentations, but briefly, I've been a lawyer for 34 years, and my practice is diverse in that I do business litigation, a lot of insurance litigation, and I also do quite a bit of equine and agricultural related liability mainly, but other issues as well. So it's a busy practice, and it's always fascinating because, as you know, agricultural issues, animal and livestock issues are never boring. And so it's kept me busy to the point where I've tried cases in 4 states. I've been specially admitted out-of-state counsel in 18 jurisdictions around the country, working with local counsel in other areas that aren't on my own. And it's fun. It's always fun, and The best part is connecting with people and doing my best, just as you do, to help people through very difficult situations, and to be very conscious, of course, that litigation is not cheap. And I think our job, and I'm sure you take it to heart, is to be practical and to try wherever you can to resolve matters so that your clients don't have to overspend on legal fees.
So Julie, getting right back to the meat of the conversation, which today we're going to talk about livestock insurance. Let's just talk about the bare bones here. So what exactly is livestock insurance, and how does it compare to different types of insurance?
Sure. Livestock insurance is a policy of insurance that the owner of an animal, when we talk livestock, we're talking usually about a horse, breeding cattle, animals with some value. But it's the policy of insurance that the owner takes out on an animal of value. There are different types of livestock insurance that people can buy. And livestock insurance has been around for many, many decades. Let me talk briefly about them, and then we'll talk about why it differs from human insurance, like life insurance. The common misperception, if we're talking about a mortality policy, which is the policy on the life of an animal, is that it's just like life insurance. But unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you view it, it's not. Livestock mortality insurance is the policy taken out on the animal. From the moment the insurance company accepts the coverage and agrees to insure an animal, it does take a financial interest, a strong one, in the well-being of the animal. Underwriters will want information when you apply on sometimes the show history, breeding history, produce history, purchase price, lease prices, all sorts of details on the animal. So you're covered under the classic livestock mortality policy form if the animal dies or is a candidate for euthanasia. That's what really makes it differ from life insurance, because we won't get into the sad issue of suicide on life insurance policies. We'll put that aside. But with an equine or livestock mortality policy, you can potentially put your animal down and collect on the policy. But doing that requires detail. And these are some of the fine points that people who buy this insurance need to be aware of. But equine mortality insurance is probably the biggest example of livestock, mortality insurance is the biggest example. Other kinds of livestock insurances could be endorsements, agreed value endorsements. Most policies have it these days, where you are locked in on a value, but there could be some movement if there's an issue of misrepresentation in the application. It doesn't occur very often. Guaranteed renewal, that's a very common provision. Loss of use is an endorsement that is for an extra cost. There are two types of it. It's an expensive endorsement. A lot of people with horses consider it, but considering the type of risks that you're insuring, which is just that use, some people think it's not a good investment. I could discuss it in detail, but it's not a very common endorsement, so I'll move on. There are specified peril policies where you can insure for certain types of risks. There are herd policies where you take out a policy, it's generally a low-cost one, on an entire herd at your facility, but it's not as specific and as comprehensive as livestock, mortality insurance. There are stallion or bull infertility policies that can be purchased. Those are often considered or referred to as AS&D, accident, sickness, and disability. If the animal, stallion, bull, becomes infertile because of something of that type, well, you've got a policy to protect you. Prospective foal insurance for horses, I don't believe there's a comparable one for other industries. Would apply if you have an in utero foal and you want coverage in case the foal is not born healthy or not born at all. So these are different types of coverages, but the most common, livestock mortality.
So with the livestock mortality, what is the term that is effective? For example, when I go to cattle sales, sometimes there will actually be a livestock insurance salesperson that's there. I'm assuming, although I don't know for certain, is that if they purchase the insurance that day, then that would insure them from that day forward, including the transport. But then when does it end?
The typical policy term for livestock mortality is a year. And there could be, we talked about the possibility of a guaranteed renewal endorsement, automatic renewal, things of that type, but it's a one-year term. Underwriters are going to ask information when that anniversary comes up, actually before, so that you have the info in their hand before the anniversary. They want to know about the condition of the animal, any veterinary attention, and we'll get to that in a bit about notice to the company. But that 1-year term can mean nothing happened to the animal, just routine care, or it could mean all kinds of things. The company will reevaluate and determine whether to impose exclusions, maybe reduce the coverage, or impose some other restrictions.
Very interesting. So you're talking a little bit about the comparison with life insurance and mortality insurance before. Are there any other comparisons there between the two?
Probably that's the comparison that people hear about, and that's the misunderstanding that people have, because this is a policy that really looks for communication between you, the animal owner, and the insurance company, as opposed to me with my life insurance policy. And the only time the company will be in touch with me is if it's one of these renewal policies that just auto renews. They want my money. They may ask me to answer a couple questions on a renewal form, but I've never seen that in my policy experience. So with a human, it's generally a lack of communication except to pay up, at least with the typical life policy. But there is a lot of exchange back and forth between that animal owner and that mortality insurance company during that year of the policy term, which we can talk about.
So Julie, I know that the Risk Management Agency, which is an arm or part of the USDA, has crop insurance that's reinsured, right? And it's my understanding that there's also livestock insurance that's reinsured as well from the RMA. How does that differ from livestock insurance that you would get privately?
That's a great question. And candidly, I am not familiar with the product that you're talking about. It hasn't come across my desk. So I'll have you answer that question because I don't think I would know the difference.
You know, Julie, I'm a little unclear. It's my understanding that there's not the robust choices that are available in the government reinsured insurance space. You're really only dealing with protected perils. And to be honest with you, Julie, I don't even know if it would cover horses. It might only cover different types of livestock. So it's something worth exploring because I'm a little unclear from my position. I've only really have seen producers purchase it privately. What are the most common disputes that you see people encounter with livestock insurance, Julie?
I would put it that the number one dispute that seems to come up with the most frequency is the issue of notice. And here's what I mean by that. When we talk about the differentiating factors between livestock insurance and life insurance, the life insurance policy doesn't really, or the company issuing it on a human, really doesn't care if you're in the hospital seeking medical attention, you break your leg. It's not so important. They only care about the end. With livestock insurance, however, the typical policy provision includes a requirement, often a condition precedent to coverage based on policy terms. And that requirement is that you are obligated to give the company immediate notice. Now, policies may refer to immediate notice. Some say notice as soon as practicable. Some have other terms, but we'll use the term for now, immediate notice. If the animal insured sustains illness, injury, lameness, or some other disability of any kind during the course of the policy term. So the insurance companies aren't necessarily expecting you to just act on your own, giving the animal whatever attention you deem necessary, whether it's a stomach problem, in horses it's colic sometimes, a lameness problem, if an issue occurs. That company expects that you will be giving the horse proper care, which is another issue. But what that company wants you to do is keep their representatives immediately notified of the problem. And the dispute which occurs with the most frequency is when an insured party, the owner, doesn't give that company notice until much later in the game. Even with proper care, arguably given to the insured animal, that insurance company who has been denied notice and isn't aware of a problem could potentially claim violation of that condition and seek to get out of coverage. A quick example is a case that I continually cite that is out of Kentucky, where a gentleman who was very, very wealthy, in fact, owned an insurance agency, his name was Ralph Wilson, had a dispute with a Lloyd's of London syndicate. He had a very expensive, high-dollar thoroughbred, and the horse had a couple of lameness problems. The company, which is to say the Lloyd's syndicate, knew about the problem at the beginning and knew he was going to be having some attention done, but Mr. Wilson and his assistant failed to keep the company in the loop despite a lot of veterinary attention and I think even a surgery. And when the problem occurred to the point where the horse needed to be euthanized, Lloyd's put its foot down and denied coverage. Some would say that the horse already got proper care. Lloyd's wasn't prejudiced. Lloyd's didn't lose out. The horse would have been put down anyway. Lloyd's position was, hey, our policy requires immediate notice. We were not kept in the loop, and they did raise the issue. I believe this gets raised in other cases. It's possible that they would have sent the animal for another opinion. Companies can request that. Often they'll pay for it themselves, but they were deprived that because by the time they learned of the problem, this horse was already a candidate to be put down. So notice is absolutely the number one, I would say, issue with livestock mortality insurance. But I think it's a preventable issue. Let me also say, if you'd like, we can get to the issue of how to prevent it. The issue plays out in notice in a couple of different ways. As I mentioned, the policies will say we need immediate notice, and the problems are when people take it upon themselves to care for the animal and leave the company in the dark. I don't want to suggest to everybody listening to this that if you are insuring livestock and you make a mistake, you call the company the next morning when the horse was showing colic signs the night before, that you are out and you're going to lose coverage. Every notice issue that I have litigated or worked on is unique, and the companies look at them all separately. But the takeaway is avoid the problem, because litigation can be difficult and very focused in recent cases in protecting the insurance company.
So, Julie, with that in mind, I am guilty of this myself as well, but I think a lot of people get insurance and they don't read the whole insurance policy, right?
Agreed.
So what is your advice for preventative medicine? Should farmers, ranchers, horse owners visit with an attorney or do some kind of an insurance review so they understand the major points of their policy before there's ever a dispute? Should it just be kept in a file, and if something comes up, they should then run and grab it and show it to their lawyer? What's your advice here?
Well, you're automatically giving a good service to people who are in the livestock and agricultural industries, because by having this podcast, you're raising an issue that people might have some thought about. Maybe they didn't think about this before. But the number one recommendation is read your policy. But let's face it, who does that? They're not fun. They're much more readable now than they've ever been. They're generally plain English compared to what we saw back in the 70s, maybe the early 80s. Read your policy if that's something you can do. But more than anything, what we're talking about today is that piece of the policy that is extremely important and can make the difference between a claim accepted or rejected, and that is read the policy's notice requirements. Some insurance companies actually make it easy for you. They will give you a stall card or some information to pass along to whoever has care, custody, and control of the animal. And all you do, this is a little tab, is you keep these and you pass them on. And what will be on the card is information on the 1-800 number that the company wants you to call to give notice of an issue. Typically what I mean by that is that the insurance agent who sold you the policy is almost always not the one you're supposed to contact if you have illness, lameness, injury, or something to report. Instead, the companies have agencies, companies that are on watch all the time, waiting to receive notice. There are some companies that do it in-house. Great American Insurance, for example, for years, has had its own staff ready and willing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, Christmas, New Year's, any holiday. But the point is you can share that information with anybody who has custody of your animal. the boarding stable, the person who's leasing your bull, your horse trainer, if it's a horse, everybody can be on board and have that information to make that call for you if you're not reachable. So you can focus on the fact that the company wants that information, and you can share it with everybody who's got the animal. And of course, haulers. The hauler of the animal, if the animal sustains a pretty bad injury, can get that information and make that 1-800 number call.
That's great. That's great advice. Any other suggestions on how livestock producers, horse owners can prevent these types of dispute with insurance?
Contract. I'm a big believer in a boarding contract, for example, and I mainly work in the horse industry, although I have handled a few cases involving cattle. With my experience drafting boarding and training contracts with horses, I always put in the contract that the owner is giving this information on the animal. First, that the animal is insured. Second, the company issuing the policy. Third, the policy number. And fourth, that 1-800 number. And then I tell my stable clients who have custody of animals belonging to others, even trainers, keep that information not just on your cell phone, but maybe even on the stall. Have a stall card that you can pull out so that if there is an emergency and your phone's not around or you can't pull it up, it's right there. Keep it handy. So put it in the contracts, keep the information handy. That's one of the ways, or a couple of the ways, that I try to keep people ahead of the problem.
That's great. And Julie, I know you're located in Michigan. What's your advice for our listeners on how to find an equine lawyer or an agricultural lawyer near them that to best serve their particular issue?
You may have some suggestions of your own, but nowadays we have the ability to do a Google search or a search engine search, and it may come up with names. Are you getting the right person, the one with the most experience, the one who's right for you? Maybe not. You'll need to do some checking on your own. But one thing you and I both know is if you do that search and you find a dynamite lawyer in another state, that can be a problem because lawyers are not able to practice law in jurisdictions where they're not licensed. That's a problem with me because I work around the country, but people don't always know that I'm not allowed to step in on a case in California or a matter. I need to have a local attorney working with me. But there are associations that sometimes have member directories that are searchable. How would you suggest people find a good agricultural lawyer or livestock lawyer?
Yeah, I think that those are great suggestions. I mean, I'm also a big fan of the American Agricultural Law Association. It's not as strong if you're looking for an equine specific attorney. And I'm curious if horse breed associations have helpful referral lists for folks that are looking for an equine lawyer.
Usually not. Often it's just word of mouth. If you get lucky and anybody listening in calls an association and says, I'm looking for a recommendation, the person fielding that call may have some names, but I have yet to hear of a breed or disciplinary association, or not disciplinary, discipline association that has a handy list of lawyers.
Well, Julie, I really appreciate you coming to the podcast. Where can our listeners find you? Do you have any contact information that you want to share?
Anybody who's looking for information on me can probably most easily find me through www.equinelaw.net. Any information that you would like on the book, Equine Law and Horse Sense, can easily be found through Amazon because it's now available there, or go to equinelaw.info and you'll find more information on the book.
Thanks again.
Appreciate it.